In a supply chain, assets usually do not vary too much, but demand mostly fluctuates. So in this situation, matching demand with supply is always very challenging. In this chapter, we look at how pricing and revenue management can be used in a supply chain to better match supply with demand. So let's start by looking at what is the role of pricing and revenue management in a supply chain. So revenue management is the use of pricing to increase the profit generated from a limited supply of supply chain assets. So these assets take two forms in a supply chain. One is capacity and other one is inventory. So capacity assets in a supply chain could include production, for example, how many machines a plant has. Similarly, it could be in terms of transportation, like how many trucks are available, and also how much storage space is available. So inventory exists throughout the supply chain. So it could be from supplier to manufacturer, maybe within the manufacturing facility, or it may be in transit, or it may be sitting in a warehouse or retailing. So the idea behind revenue management is to grow profits by selling right asset to the right customer at the right price. So if you take example of a company like Amazon, so Amazon makes use of a strategy where shipping cost is not constant. In fact, they make use of differential pricing. So if you want to purchase something, you may be given options like whether you want that item to be shipped within 24 hours or you are willing to wait for 2 days or 3 days or more than a week. So depending on the urgency of your needs, you may have a different shipping price. Another example is American Airlines. So somewhere around early 1980s, they faced a lot of challenge from a company called People Express. So People Express offered fare that were 50 to 80% lower than those of other carriers. And by 1983, they were flying like 40 aircrafts and achieving a load factor of more than 74%. So what American Airlines did was they lowered prices of some of the seats to below what was offered by People Express, and these number of low-priced seats were especially larger on flights that were likely to have empty seats, and those empty seats would not have produced any revenue. So this strategy of differential pricing by American Airlines was one of the reasons why People Express collapsed by 1986. So basically, one of the aims of revenue management is to have targeted differential pricing. Revenue management has significant impact on supply chain profitability when one or more of following four conditions are met. The value of the product varies in different market segments. And one good example of this is airline seats. So for example, a business traveler who has to reach somewhere in time, so a business traveler may be ready to pay a slightly higher price to get a seat that matches his or her schedule. On the other hand, somebody who is going on a vacation, so they may be very flexible and their main objective may be to get a seat at as low price as possible. Second condition is the product is highly perishable or product wastage occurs. One example of such a product is dresses that are related to seasons. So customers may be willing to pay higher price at the beginning of the season. On the other hand, they may not be willing to pay very high price towards the end of the season. Similarly, production or storage or transportation capacity loses its value if it is not used at a given point in time. For example, a plant may have a machine and if it is not used for 1 day, so that capacity is lost. Or if there is a truck that has to go from place A to place B and on a given day if it is only half full and still it has to travel from A to B, then that extra capacity that the truck had on a given day is not available to be used next day. Similarly, in an aircraft, if some seats are vacant during a flight, so they go waste because next time the flight takes off, those seats are not available or they cannot be used next time. Third condition is demand has seasonal and other peaks. So one example of this is hotel rooms, and especially at tourist locations. Fourth one is the product is sold both in bulk and on the spot market. So generally long-term contracts are more safe or secure and they fetch a lower average price compared to unpredictable spot market. So in these situations also revenue management increases profit by finding the right balance between long-term and spot market customers. So generally we find that most of the successful examples of revenue management have occurred in travel and hospitality industries. So examples include airlines or car rentals or hotels. American Airlines in fact has reported that revenue management techniques helped it to increase revenues by more than 1 billion each year. Similarly, revenue management has helped Marriott hotel chains to increase revenue by more than $100 million every year. So how do we carry out pricing and revenue management for multiple customer segments? So that's the question we like to answer next. So there are two fundamental issues that must be handled in practice. How much can the firm differentiate between two segments and structure its pricing to make one segment pay more than the other? So typical example that we have is airlines, where we have business travelers as well as people who are going on vacation. So how do we differentiate between these two segments and how do we structure its pricing to make one segment pay more than the other? Second issue is how can the firm control demand such that the lower paying segment does not utilize the entire availability of the assets. So for example, generally a business traveler may book seats almost at the last minute, whereas people who plan vacations, they may plan vacations in months ahead. So there is some probability that what can happen is if we want to attract more customers early, we may not have anything left for the business travelers who book at the last minute. So how do we address this issue? So let's consider a trucking company, and suppose they have 6 trucks, and suppose the total capacity is 6,000 cubic feet, and suppose that the monthly lease charge is $1,500 per truck. And also let's assume that based on market research, the demand curve is given by this equation here. So this demand is across all segments, and this P here is the transportation cost per cubic feet. If the price is $2, this will lead to a demand of 6,000, and this is the total capacity of this trucking company. So all the capacity will be used. So which means 2 times 6,000 is 12,000. So that's going to be the revenue. The cost is this 1,500 times 6 for all the trucks. So that's about $9,000. So net profit is about 3,000. But if you consider a price of 350, so if you increase the price to 350, so demand is going to fall and it will be somewhere here, which is about 3,000. So if you multiply 3,000 by 3.5, that will give us a revenue of 10,500. But the total cost is still 9,000. The net profit is only 1,500 this time. And if it is 2.5, so this gives us a profit of 3,500. But if this company goes for a differential pricing and takes care of demand of 3,000 with $3.50 and remaining 3,000 with $2, then it can make a total revenue of 10,500 plus 6,000, which is 16,500. And remember, cost is 9,000. So the profit now becomes 7,500. So we can see that out of all options, this option seems to be most profitable. So this way, for this trucking company, the segments can be differentiated based on how far in advance a customer is willing to commit. So these will be customers who get some discount and they pay only $2. And the customers who are making use of this trucking facility at the last minute, so they have to pay $3.50. So this differential pricing obviously gives much better outcome. So in situations where we have multiple segments, we must solve two problems. One is, what price should the company charge for each segment? And the second is, how should it allocate limited capacity among the segments? So in this case, 3,000 capacity is for people who are paying $2 and remaining 3,000 is for people who are ready to pay 3.5. So to answer questions regarding what price should the company charge for each segment, we can make use of this formula here. So we consider situations where demand curve for each segment is known and is given by this equation. And basically, to find the right price, supplier maximizes this equation and it gives us this formula here. But also in some situations, we have capacity which is constrained by some number Q. So in those situations, we can maximize this term subject to this constraint that where capacity can be maximum of this amount Q. Let's look at one example. So suppose in a business there are two customer segments and the demand is given by D1 and D2. So D1 captures customer unwilling to commit. So that means they may be making purchase at the last minute, whereas the other segment is where customers are willing to commit. So they are ready to buy in advance. So the customers who are unwilling to commit, these customers are more likely to be less sensitive to price. They may be ready to pay higher price to get the service or use the supply chain assets. And the customers who are willing to commit, so these are likely to be more sensitive to price and obviously they are looking to reduce cost. And the production cost C is $10. So using the formula in the previous slide, we can calculate P1 and P2, price for customer segment 1 and price for customer segment 2. And using these two numbers, we can also calculate demand from first segment of customers, which comes to 2,400, and demand from second segment of customers, which comes to 2,300. And using this, we can calculate total profit, which comes to $420,250. Now, if you compare this to situation where the manufacturer charges same price to both the segments, and let's say that price is P. So if we apply the formula, we can find that P comes to $88.33. So using this in equation D1 and D2, we get 3233.4 and 1466.8 and a total profit of $368,166.67, which you can see is much less than the earlier number. So you can see that differential pricing helps to increase profits by more than 50,000 when you compare it to fixed price. Now let's consider a situation where total production capacity is limited to 4,000 units. So now we use the second equation and we maximize this term here subject to the constraint of the capacity, and also these terms has to be more than or equal to 0. So we want to be able to find the optimal price values. We want to maximize this number, which is the total profit, by changing these two cells. And we also say that these two numbers have to be more than or equal to 0, and this number here should be less than or equal to 4000. So then we say solve. So these are the values we get. So let's convert this into dollars. So price for the first segment of customer should be $141.67. Second segment $79.17, and the total profit we get is $412,083.33. So when there was no capacity limit, we had 130 for the first segment, 67.5 for the next segment. But now you can observe that both of these prices are higher when there is a capacity limit. So while doing these calculations, we assume that no one from the higher price segment decides to switch to lower price segment. And we also assume that once the prices are decided, customer demand is predictable. But in practice, these assumptions sometimes may not hold. So there will be situations where we'll have some uncertainty. So how do we allocate capacity to a segment under uncertainty? So the basic trade-off is between committing to an order from a lower price buyer or waiting for higher price buyer to arrive. So based on this, there will be two risks. One is spoilage and other is spill. So spoilage occurs when capacity that is reserved for higher price buyer is wasted because demand from the higher price segment does not materialize. On the other hand, spill occurs if high price buyer must be turned away because the capacity has already been committed to lower price buyer. So obviously in this situation, the supplier of this supply chain asset must make a decision regarding how much capacity should be committed to the high price buyer so that expected cost of spoilage and spill is minimized. So suppose we have PL, which is the price charged to the lower price segment, so L for lower, and we also have PH, which is the price charged to higher price segment. And we also assume that the demand for higher price segment is normally distributed, with mean demand being DH and standard deviation sigma of H. Suppose CH is another term, which is the capacity that we want to reserve for higher price segment. Then we can calculate revenue for this higher segment using this formula. So we have probability that the demand from higher price segment is more than CH times the price. And if we consider this to be equal to PL, then we can calculate how much capacity should be reserved for high price segment using this formula here. So let's consider the trucking business again, and suppose the price segment A is willing to pay is $3.5, whereas for segment B it is $2. And suppose mean demand, which is normally distributed, is 3000 with a standard deviation of 1000. So we can calculate CA using normal distribution formula, and it comes to 2820. So this will be the capacity to be reserved for segment A. Now, how this capacity to be reserved for segment A will change if we go from $3.50 to, let's say, the customer is willing to pay $5. So in the same equation, if you replace 350 by 5, it gives us 3253. So if the customer is willing to pay more, so obviously the capacity to be reserved for this high paying customer will also go up. So another way companies make use of differential pricing is by creating different versions of a product target at different segments. So for example, publishers, they introduce new books from best-selling authors as hardcover editions, which are more expensive. And then those same books are introduced to the market at some later date as a paperback edition, which are much cheaper. So now let's look at pricing and revenue management for perishable assets. Any asset that loses value over time is perishable. So some examples could include fruits, vegetables, or some medicines that come with the expiry date. And it can also include technology products such as cell phones or computers. Similarly, fashion garments also lose value over time. Similarly, if you look at unused capacity from past, so that has no value. So if there are 2 empty seats in an aircraft today, those 2 empty seats cannot be used tomorrow. So we can treat unused capacity also as something which is similar to perishable capacity. So there are two basic approaches. One is vary price dynamically over time to maximize expected revenue. So this is called dynamic pricing. And another approach is to do overbooking. Like in an aircraft, it may have 200 seats, but based on historical data, they may know that on an average 10 customers cancel their tickets at the last minute. Even when 200 tickets are purchased, maybe they end up with only 190. Considering that so many tickets might be cancelled at the last minute, they may overbook by let's say 10, so that even after cancellation they end up with full flight. So one example of dynamic pricing could be in garment industry, where a fashion clothing may lose value beyond certain time. For example, a dress which is designed for winter may lose lot of value by April. So we make use of a simple methodology for dynamic pricing. So let's say a seller has quantity Q of an item that they want to sell, and we also assume that the seller is able to divide season into K periods, and also for each period they are able to forecast what will be demand. The idea is to maximize the demand time price value here, subject to the constraint of quantity Q, and obviously we want demand to be more than or equal to 0. So note that the demand curve that we assume here is linear, and this linearity is assumed for simplicity. In reality, it may be non-linear too. And one assumption that we make is customers that purchase in initial periods are less price sensitive, whereas those customers who purchase later are more price sensitive. And basically, retailer wants to vary the price over time so that they are able to maximize the revenue they can extract out of Q items. So let's look at one example. Suppose a retailer has purchased 400 jackets, and cost of each jacket is let's say $100. So basically the total that the retailer has to pay is 100 times 400, which is $40,000. And suppose for period 1, retailer forecasts that the demand will be like this. For period 2, it will be given by this equation, and for period 3, it is given by this equation. So basically we want to solve this problem to find out how should the retailer vary prices in each of the 3 periods to maximize the revenue. And also we want to know how much profit retailer can make. So we use the formula above and we maximize this term subject to these conditions. So if we make a fixed price model, total revenue comes to this number here. But if we use dynamic pricing, where the price changes depending on the period, we get more than 51,000 in revenue. So basically, if the retailer wants to keep a fixed price during the 3 months, so retailer should keep that price at $121.95. So we can see that by changing price dynamically, retailer is able to increase profits by about $3,000. instead of having quantity Q as 400, suppose we make that also as a decision variable. Basically, we can also figure out how many jackets retailers should purchase at the start of the season to maximize profits. So based on this, we find that the optimal quantity is 245, and then they can be priced 200 for the first month of the season, $165.38 for the second month, and $133.33 for the third month. So that will give the best profit, which comes to more than 17,500. So remember, in the previous problem we assumed this to be 400. By solving it for Q, we get a quantity of 245, which will be ideal. Now, overbooking occurs when a seller with limited capacity sells more units than it has. So airlines, for example, they often overbook to make sure that there are no empty seats. For example, if an aircraft has 200 seats and historically 10 seats get cancelled on an average by the time this flight takes off. So if they do not do anything, on an average they will be flying this aircraft only with 190 seats filled. So what they do is they overbook by about 10, so that instead of 200 they sell 210 tickets, and even when 10 people cancel, they will have a full flight of 200. Suppose this is the cost of wasted capacity and this is the cost of capacity shortage. So this S means what is the probability that the cancellations will be less than or equal to overbooking level, where we can find the overbooking level, this O star. So one situation could be where we know the distribution of cancellations in absolute terms. So for example, we know that 10 tickets will be cancelled at the last minute. So if we have that idea, we can use this formula. Or we may have a situation where it is a function of booking level. So how many bookings we have as a function of that. So in those situations, we can use this formula. So suppose we consider a supplier for dresses, and suppose the capacity is 5,000 dresses, and suppose they make $10 for each dress. So the cost of wasted capacity is $10 per dress, and the cost of capacity shortage is $5. So S star comes to 0.667. If we consider cancellation levels to be absolute, we can calculate optimal overbooking level using this formula. It comes to 973. So we are assuming that the cancellations follow a normal distribution with mean 800 and standard deviation 400. So this is what we have used here. So that gives us 973. So since they have capacity of 5,000, using this they should make use of 5,000 plus 973. So a total of 5973 dresses. But if the cancellations are normally distributed with a mean of 15% of the booking level, and also coefficient of variation is 0.5, then we can make use of this second formula. So note that coefficient of variation is given by sigma over x bar, or we can rewrite sigma as CV times x bar. So CV is 0.5 and x bar is 15% of the booking level. So this is 0.15. So this will give us 0.075. So this is the number which is used here, and this is 0.5 multiplied by this term here. So suppose we want to find this value for overbooking. And then we go to solver. So we maximize this value by changing B1, and constraint is that this equals this number. So it gives us 1115. So optimal overbooking level will be 5000 plus this number, which is 6115. So note that these calculation only give some direction, but how much overbooking has to be done and how it needs to be managed, a company has to be very, very careful. Let's say they know that the 10 tickets will be cancelled at the last minute, and instead of 200, they book for 210, hoping that 10 will be cancelled. And they have only 200 seats. Now, what will happen if only 9 customers cancel and 201 customers show up? So, they must have some kind of expensive backup plan in these situations. So, in fact, this is news from April 10th, 2017, where you see a police drag man from United plane after airplane reportedly overbooked flight. As a business, one has to be really careful to handle such overbooking. If you look at tweets on this day, you'll find a lot of negative comments for the company. In fact, there's a company which says, "Today we cancelled our corporate accounts. No one deserves to be assaulted due to overbooking." So, pricing and revenue management for seasonal demand is another important area. So, seasonal peaks of demand is very common in many supply chains. So, for example, what Amazon does is, because holiday season is a peak season and it constrains the transportation or shipping of items, they offer free shipping as some kind of off-peak discount. And they also give price discount to customers who are ready to shift their demand a bit earlier compared to the peak season. So that eases their capacity to some extent during the peak holiday season. So off-peak discounting can shift demand from peak to non-peak periods. So this is also common in movie tickets. Instead of watching a movie in the evening, which is a peak time, if someone is ready to watch the movie in the morning, so the price is relatively lower. So hotel industry, they do differential pricing by day of the week and also time of the year. For example, for hotels like Marriott, peak demand days are generally in the middle of the week. So they offer lower rates during weekends to encourage families who are traveling for vacation and so on. So these businesses use differential pricing by charging higher price during peak periods and lower price during off-peak periods. Finally, we look at pricing and revenue management for bulk and spot contracts. So any supply chain asset owner has generally 3 options. One is fulfill demand from bulk sales and serve small customers only if there is anything left. And second option is a business may target only emergency customers, so from whom they can charge more. And the third option is to go for something in between. So in this case, actually trade-off is very similar to a firm serving 2 market segments that we have seen earlier. So suppose CB is the bulk rate and CS is the spot market price. So we obtain the optimal value as P star using these two. And if the demand follows normal distribution with mean mu and standard deviation sigma, so we can find optimal asset purchased in bulk. In the example below, let's consider a manufacturer who sources components from China and has transportation needs which are normally distributed with mean 10 million units and a standard deviation of 4 million units. So now this manufacturer has to make a decision on what portfolio of transportation contracts they should have. So a bulk contract will cost $10,000 per million units and the spot market cost is higher, which is $12,500. So the question is, how much transportation capacity should the manufacturer sign a long-term bulk contract for? So using the formula, we obtain P star as 0.2 and also the optimal amount to be purchased using long-term bulk contract, it comes to 6.63. So which means that the manufacturer should go for a long-term bulk contract for 6.63 million units per month. So remember, average demand is 10 million. So what they can do is they can buy remaining transportation needs from the spot market at a higher price.